Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Feeling and Healing podcast. Today, I am so happy to welcome Cristina Louk. She is a counselor as well as a coach. She coaches people through their ADHD and their trauma and specializes in that area of life, and especially people with adult diagnoses of ADHD. So, welcome, Cristina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So let's just dive right in because this is your area of expertise. Could you just tell me, I guess, a little bit about kind of that experience? Because I feel like there are so many adults nowadays that are diagnosed with ADHD, later in life, and they kind of have this like identity, like, oh my gosh, what is this? How do how do I walk through the world now with this diagnosis
Oh,
and what have you?
for sure. I see a lot of late diagnosed ADHDers, and what I see is these people that have struggled their whole lives, and they
Mm,
don't know why, but they've internalized it as I am the problem, something is wrong with me. And then they get this diagnosis of ADHD, and it's just their life starts to make sense. Nothing is wrong with you. You just happen to have this different brain that functions
hmm
differently. And it for a lot of people, it's really life-giving. They're finally realizing that it's not something inherent in them. And so it
mm,
makes me a little sad when I see adults that get diagnosed so late because I was diagnosed as a kid. I knew very early on. Yeah, I got
yeah.
ADHD. If you struggle with my stuff, it's because of this, right? So I had like, so for me, I didn't have to internalize anything. I had that knowledge really early, but for these adults, they don't. So
Mm.
we see a lot of anxiety, depression, trauma when they're coming in. And they do all this work for trauma, for anxiety. They're taking the meds for it. It's not working. What's going on?
Yeah.
And then we find out it's ADHD. You don't have anxiety. You don't have trauma. You don't, well, they probably do have trauma, but probably not depression. You're just anxious and depressed over symptoms that makes no sense to you. So,
Hmm.
adult diagnosis is so crucial. If you're suspecting you have ADHD, I highly recommend getting assessed.
Yeah, no, that's a great advice because I feel like too, we also, I would love to pick your brain as well. We like live in like this, like such a fast-paced society, right? And we're like, I feel like sometimes I'm like, do I have ADHD? I'm like, oh my God, because like
Yeah.
we're moving so quickly and everything, our attention spans are like nothing. So I guess what advice would you give to somebody who maybe might think they are, maybe ADHD or they're kind of just or like, or is it just like, oh, is it just like the world we live in and life?
Yeah, well, a lot of ADHD symptoms can present through learned behaviors of living in this fast-paced Western modern world,
Hmm
where our distraction is quick because we have TikTok and we can scroll at a rapid pace. And so modern, adults are learning these behaviors that can look like ADHD. But the key is you've struggled your whole life. This is something that you were born with. It is a difference in our brains. Now, here's the catcher. Let's say you maybe have a higher intelligence. You've been able to cope and adapt, and you really didn't struggle. Those are the people that I also like to catch because you might not have struggled so much as a kid. You still might have ADHD, or it could be learned behaviors, but it's important to know, is it ADHD or is it learned behaviors? If it's ADHD, medication, therapy, there's so many things we can do. If it's learned behaviors, again, there's things we can do to change those behaviors to minimize those symptoms in your life. Untreated ADHD has a lot of like negative things that could happen. Untreated ADHD, we have shorter lifespans because
Really?
of because we're more impulsive. We tend to do more dangerous things. We tend to have more obesity, more substance use problems because we're trying to self-medicate. So, untreated adult ADHD could really be detrimental. So, if you think it could be, if you're questioning, get the assessment because treatment is key. We don't want to shorten your lifespan because you didn't want to know. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah,
I did
a
not
lot of,
know that it could shorten your
yeah,
like, potentially short, I guess untreated symptoms, and I did not know that. So that was
yeah.
very
The data is different between specialists, but it's in anywhere between 7 and 10 years. So it's significant.
Wow. Oh,
It's
yeah,
significant.
that's not like a
Yeah.
couple years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's
that is
significant.
significant. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess what you find, and I always ask this people, especially like in the diagnosing world, when you are working with your clients and people that have been a diagnosed adult ADHD, are you finding that they, kind of like to have a sense of calm with their diagnosis, or do they feel it as like a sense, like a kind of like a stigma, like another label that they have to wear, unfortunately?
I think that times have really changed since I
Hmm.
was diagnosed in the late 1970s. There used to be a lot of bias,
Mm.
but the newer generations have come out, and neurodiversity has actually been something that people have actually embraced. I am
Yes.
seeing less of the bias. I'm also very much solution focused, strength based. I see ADHD as this wonderful gift. Let's learn how to
Mhm.
use it. And so I try to, if I do sense any bias, I try to easily move them toward now. When I'm talking to clients and they want to get accommodations at work, I am really upfront that biases at work still do exist. You have to
Hmm.
look at the culture of your company. And we might need to strategize a way to get accommodations in place that might look differently than if you just go into your HR department and say, "Hi, I have ADHD.
I mean, yeah.
This is what I need." So biases do exist, but they're less than they were. And the more and more ADHDers that get diagnosed and get empowered and speak out, especially those in like you know, the higher levels of business, because then everyone can see, oh my gosh, you can have ADHD and still be at the top of my game. That's why when celebrities and,
Hmm.
business people come out and say I have ADHD, I'm like, thank you.
Yes,
Let's take the stigma away. That famous actor you
absolutely.
really like, they're one of us. So,
Yeah, no, I love that you have that empowering stance on it, right? Because, I'm somebody who I don't have ADHD. I've never been tested for ADHD, but I do have general anxiety disorder like majority of the population. So it is kind of that like, like I'm not alone kind of
yeah.
feeling of like and I also too I tell like, I'm sure it's it is just because your brain is wired a little different way does not mean you are less than. It does not mean that you have a disorder. It actually, like, I'm sure you would know better than me, the way your brain works as an ADHD or as neurodivergent is, as you said, there's areas probably where you excel more than, in other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people, look at biodiversity. Our species, for us to continue, we need to be as diverse. And we
Mm,
can't have one way of thinking, one
true.
brain type, right? So if you just look at genetics and biodiversity, we're going to, expand. So there's no right or wrong.
Yes.
Neurotypical versus neurodiverse. It's not an who's the one we need. We need both.
Yes.
And it's how then do we lean into each of our strengths so we could advance society and advance, people to where we can feel safe and supported where we live.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's definitely been, and I would love your perspective on this. I've found in the most recent years a lot of talk about neurotypical and neurodivergence. So I know for those listeners of you, I would love for you to kind of explain from your perspective. Like I know there's
Yeah.
that general like like neurotypical is your brain just functions in a quote unquote like normal way. And then neurodivergent, obviously your brain functions differently, but I would love your perspective on that as a, professional in the
Yeah.
field
Yeah.
because I think it's more than that, right? It's more than just like, all right, here's your typical, normal functioning brain, and then here's your not normal functioning brain.
Yeah, the terminology is really important because it can be really triggering for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Neurotypical is a nicer way than to say the normal brain. I
Got it.
found normative. I found that to be super triggering in the research. I'm like, I don't want to hear about a normative brain. You're saying mine not normal,
Yeah,
and so
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, right.
yeah, so neurotypical is a kinder way. However, that can still be triggering, right? Because now you're saying I'm divergent. I I like to lean into, well, okay, evolution. So maybe I'm the next step. I don't know.
Yeah,
I try to
yeah,
like talk
exactly. Yeah,
myself
maybe you
into
are.
like, so I don't know. I try to talk myself into thinking if I'm divergent, there must be a reason. There must be a
Mm.
reason for the divergence. It's, again, not that I'm different. So I try to really look at the terms just as categories, but you can see why a lot of people have adopted other terms, like neurospicy is one you might
Oh, I
hear.
like that.
Um, you hear that kind of in the social media. Other people are adopting however they want to label themselves. And to me, and I've always labeled myself as an ADHDer, proud of it. So
Hmm.
a lot of us are leaning into, I'm just neurodivergent. So really, it's the label. You have to pick what feels right for you. Some of us don't like labels at all,
Yeah.
and so you have to go with what's right for you. But that's really where those terms are coming from. They're coming from research, just ways of categorizing the two different brains. I wish we would come up with something different, like
Mm.
brain A, brain B, right?
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
that differentiates but doesn't put a hierarchy on it, where typical and divergent sometimes do.
Yeah, no, I will say as a MFT in training, we are trained not to label. So I'm that's always a very
Yeah.
I'm always very curious around diagnoses because I've seen both sides of the spectrum, right? Where they do provide some relief and like, oh, like as you were saying when you were a kid, you were like, oh yeah, like this makes sense. But then for some people, it's like, oh, I don't want to always be labeled as neurodivergent or an
Yes.
ADHD or somebody with dyslexia. But and I think I loved your point of that, like instead of, we're all different and that being diverse as a
Yes.
society makes us more unique and definitely we need, I would say life is a paradox, right? Like we need both, we need both neurodivergence and neurotypical.
Yeah. I like to look at labels as a tool and not as a source of your identity.
Mm.
And when I'm giving people their diet, when I do an assessment and I have to give them their diagnosis,
Hmm.
this is not who you are. You only use these to get what you need. So here is your
Hmm.
diagnosis of ADHD. This is what you take to a psychiatrist to get access to your medication.
Yeah,
So I think a lot of it, because I labels to me make it's very cringe. When I started
I
in my
know. Yeah.
clinical world, I'm like, I don't want to diagnose. And then I'm like, but I have to, if
Yeah.
they want to
It's
get their
part of reality.
meds.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they want to get their accommodations. So it's really, labels are a tool, not your identity. You
I love
use
that.
them, don't live by them.
Yes, yes. And then I think too, you make a great point about like kind of the mental health like world is like unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. I mean that we are, the traditional medical model of like, diagnose, treat, cure does is
Yeah.
paramount and that's what the mental health model, fell in line with that.
Yeah.
Um, but I would love your perspective as well on because as I said, like diagnoses don't also mean I think that there's like a misconception in the mental health world that like yes, you're diagnosed but like diagnosed with something, but a lot of things at least that I'm learning or in my mental health journey, me personally, a lot of that is fluid. And I'm not saying that you can cure, I'm sure you would know better than me, curing ADHD, but you can definitely, I'm sure, work with your symptoms and cope with them in different, like we're very like I feel like fluid and malleable as human beings in our mental health.
Yeah.
So we're able to adapt better than if it were, a chronic illness, like true medical model diagnosis versus just a mental health one. I think there's definitely more coping mechanisms you can use to combat that
Oh, for
in your
sure.
day-to-day life.
Yeah, the medical model does not fit for
No.
many of the mental health conditions that we see. There is no cure for ADHD or autism. Our brains are literally different.
Hmm.
I got a different amount of white matter and gray matter than you have. I have, and I hate to say it, I have less white matter and gray matter. I have less connections in certain areas of my brain. Like there's no curing that. I
Yeah.
would love now. The great news is research is showing stimulant medication is helping to expand some of that volume and
Yes.
connectivity. So we are seeing some growth in that area. But again, you can't make me a neurotypical person. Um, so we have to really be careful in terms of using that medical model. And even for depression and anxiety, unless we live in like this Garden of Eden where there's
Yeah,
no
right.
stress, no cortisol,
Right? Wouldn't
no
that be
trauma.
nice?
There really is no cure. It's really how do we manage the symptoms as they come so we can live this life that gets us to where we want to be, because really that's what we're here for. We're here to reach whatever pinnacle of learning that we are here for. How do we reach that? Well, we're going to be tripping on anxiety, depression, some of us ADHD, some of us autism, many of us trauma, most of us
I was
trauma.
gonna say, yeah, unfortunately, as much as I wish everybody got out of this life unscathed, I don't think any of us do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it is fluid. So to kind of get back to your point, it is fluid and the medical model really doesn't fit. When I was going to school, we did the biopsychosocial spiritual model.
Yes. Ooh, yeah.
And yeah, so I went to a humanistic school and I loved, holding all of that because humans are
Mm.
so much more than like the common
Absolutely.
cold. Yeah, cure my common cold. I don't want that forever. But some stuff, like medical model diabetes, like cure that. That'd be great, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And but even so, they're saying a lot with like diabetes. I mean, just from the little that I know about it, there's a lot like you can do with just like, diet alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you make a great point about just like general wellness. And I know you focus on wellness as well as like when it comes to mental health, emotional wellness, physical wellness, it is more than just one thing, right? It's
Yeah.
not just your physical health. It's not just your mental health. It is I love that you brought in the spiritual realm too, because I firmly believe that we are part of something bigger. Whatever you believe in, I always say, like, you go out and figure out what that means for you. But I think you make a great point is that you have to look at it as from this whole,
Yes.
the whole is equal is greater than the sum of its parts kind
Yeah.
of thing. And in order to live through this world and try to be as resilient as possible, you have to have all these which is also very stressful. You have to focus on all these different things and all the time.
Yeah, but it's all in how you build your life through these little micro
Hmm.
habits. And that's really what I've done to manage my ADHD. I've built a structured system, incredibly structured because we thrive with structure and routine,
Hmm.
that really focuses on regulating my nervous system, living what I teach. That to me
Hmm.
was really, really important, and living authentically. But
Yeah,
focus of just how do I regulate my nervous system? I do that through exercise. I do that through the foods I eat. I do that through minimizing my stress. Um,
exactly.
and then small micro habits over time just build up that structure. And, you really can.
I love that
Um,
you said that too, because I was actually just having a thought of that about this morning, and I was like having a moment with me and ChatGPT, actually, like thinking about it, and like, I think you have to think about it, and I was just thinking about how like, it's New Year's. I mean, we're recording this January 2nd of 2026, and how everybody says, like New Year's resolutions don't really work because they're too overarching, they're too like, they're just a little bit out of reach for people. And I was like, instead of making like a resolution, this should be just like, it should be a practice, like just making a practice
yes.
for the year. Because as you said, it's those micro moments, those little habits. It's not taking out like, not changing your life completely. It's like, it's in the little things that helps you get through.
Yeah. I love that you say this because it brings up to something that we talked about last time we spoke, which was my mantra for the year, which kind of leads the practices I do for the year. And last year for 2025, it was heal or heal thyself. I'm like, I
Mm.
want to do all the work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And really embody. Well, for 2026, I was really struggling with what's my mantra going to be. And I was really in my
Mhm.
head about it. And during one of my yoga practices, when I was in Shavasana, it kind of came to me in this aha moment. And it's embody the medicine. And what
Ooh,
that
like
means
that.
is that the healing is not something that I do, it's who I am. And that it's not that I'm learning and practicing, but the healing is happening within me. And
Mm,
because of me, and the medicine has always been inside of me. I am the medicine. And so
I
this
love
year my
that. Yeah,
focus
that's
is going to
great.
be inward turning, you know continuing to do the practices that turn me inward so that I can allow, whether it's for me it's my higher self, Some
Hmm.
people, it's their spirit, their soul,
Whatever. Yeah, I
whatever,
always say whatever you put, it's a tree, whatever you want to say.
whatever. But I'm now going to allow my higher self to come through, heal my physical body so I
Yeah.
can be fully present in this world and experience it to its fullest. So my practice, so going back to that, setting a yearly practice, I think everyone should set a theme.
Yeah,
What is
I
your
like that.
theme
Your
going to be?
theme. Yep.
Yeah, so last year it was just do the healing, do the work. This year it's don't rely on the work to do the healing. I got to find the healing within me. Continue to do the work,
Of
but
course, of course.
but realize it's already there and lean into that. So, love that you brought that up because so important to have practices in our life to get
Yeah,
us
and that's
habit
something.
stacking.
Exactly. That's something that I've learned. It's like once you make something a practice, like if it, like she's like, it's like brushing your teeth every day. It's like, yeah, like that's what we do for oral hygiene. You have to do it every day. And I'm not, and once whatever you incorporate in your world, right? Like for me and for you, it's like, like for you, it's, going to yoga, going, working out,
Yeah.
right? For I will say, and you when you were said this, I was like, oh, thank somebody else gets it, which I'm sure I know you get it already, given the field you're in. But a regulated nervous system, oof, like there is not a dollar amount you could
Gold.
put on, yeah, because I've been dysregulated for
Yes.
a very like for long periods of time, and it is not fun. And you sometimes you don't even know you're dysregulated until you are regulated, and then you're like, I am never allowing any situation, any person, any experience to dysregulate me again because I am at peace and my nervous system is calm and I'm coming from, you talk about your higher self, like your core self, you know what I mean? I'm acting from that place versus a reactionary place or a protective place. And also too, I appreciate that you also said, because this is something that I work with my clients too, and you do as well. I think you mentioned like healing and going inward. I think that is like the number one essential perspective when you are starting your healing journey. Because I'll be
Yeah.
honest, it is easy to go out, it is easy to look outward and to blame and to have that mindset. But if you really truly want to heal yourself and find, as you said, that medicine
Hmm.
within yourself, you gotta to put the mirror up, as painful as it is. I know it's painful. You gotta look in.
You do, you do. And you need to put the practices that allow you to do that. For me, it's yoga. I do yoga twice a
Hmm.
day,
That's
sometimes
amazing. I
three
love
times
that.
a day. And it's funny when I start to feel I'm dysregulating, I have one of my, when my daughter moved out, her room turned into a yoga studio. So, um, the other night we were watching a television show that really triggered me. Sometimes, even just watching something can have a
Of
trauma
course, you're
trigger.
human. You're human.
And my instinct was, gotta go up to the yoga room because I
Mm,
don't even want to sit for a moment in that dysregulation because I spent decades in it. And when I
mm.
finally let it go and I found like, whoa, this is like $1 billion regulated nervous system. I'm going to take the regulated nervous system because to me, I can go pick up a flower and see so much beauty in it, right? Like, oh, I want that. So I now my instinct is to go regulate. So find the practice that regulates
Yeah.
you, and then when you notice it somatically, nip it in the bud. Go immediately go do your practice, whether it's breathing, pranayama, yoga, whether you're going for a walk, whether you're just doing jumping jacks in your office, whether you're just sitting quietly, just finding a Zen moment, do something. But yeah, to live a regulated life is gold,
Yeah,
worth $1 billion.
Oh, honestly, I always say this to people, there is not a dollar amount you could put on like I've seen on Instagram and stuff that they say the new generational wealth is a regulated nervous system. And I'm like, absolutely.
Yes.
Um, because and also too I feel like it's just beneficial for you as and you like you and yourself and your higher self and your whatever you want to call it is that because you're acting from a place of you're calm, you're connected, you are truly living your life versus reacting, performing, being in that fight or flight. Like nobody wants to be in that state.
No.
Like too
I
much
was
of
telling,
life is fight or is you fighting or fight or surviving, right? And that's what my whole thing is.
right.
Like let's get out of this survival mode. And we live in a system where like literally our nervous systems are being, I always say this, we were not built for this. Like as much as I
Mm-mm.
love the world and the technology has been amazing, we were not built to always have a little like, a little square thing notifying us of something every 2 seconds, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was telling a client the other day, when you finally get regulated and you're seeing it from a higher place, a crisis happens, and your response is, huh,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Uh-huh.
Instead of, I don't know what I'm going to do. Instead you're just like, oh, okay, that looks like a challenge. Where should I
Yeah.
start? It's
Yeah.
a lovely place to be. But we need to disconnect from all of the
Absolutely.
chaos and find some peace within ourselves so we
Absolutely. And
can
I always tell
access that
people
medicine.
too, yeah, which I'm sure you agree with that having a regulated nervous system, exactly as you said, does not mean never getting triggered again. It does not mean not feeling. It just means, as you said, when you are in a state of chaos or in a state that you potentially could be activated, you just look at it so differently. You're just like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Like I got
Yeah.
this. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you don't have to struggle throughout the way or you're gonna, of course, your emotions and certain feelings are gonna pop up, but you know how to manage it. And you're like, all right, like,
You
yeah,
got it.
like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because life is gonna life, right?
Well, that's the thing. There's no cure for nervous system. We can't get rid of it. If we did, a tiger would walk in and we'd go, "Oh, there's a tiger. I'm gonna go pet
Exactly. Like,
it."
oh yeah, like,
Um,
hey, nice seeing you.
yeah, I mean, it is a survival mechanism. We have to have it, but we've gotten so dysregulated by having triggers which should not be triggering fight or flight. Like, for example, when I was saying I was watching a television show the other day and I
Exactly.
was triggered, right?
Yeah.
We're just now so accustomed to having these unmismatched, incongruent triggers for this nervous
Hmm.
system activation. The key is you recognize it early, you deal with it. We don't have to
Exactly.
live in it anymore, but we're still going
Exactly.
to be triggered daily.
100%, 100%. And thank you for like normalizing that too, because I feel like we need to come up. I know there's the word, I'm sure you've heard of it, glimmer, and there's yes, the opposite of trigger. It's like when something
Yeah.
good happens. But I feel like trigger is such like a harsh word. That sometimes I try to use the word like activated. Like if it's not quite a trigger
Mm,
for me, like I'm just like, oh, I'm a little activated by that. But that's also somebody that like I know my nervous system pretty well, and I would say I'm activated probably 90% of my life. But and to go back to, sorry to beat a dead horse, but like it being a practice is that we train our nervous systems how to react. So if you are teaching it to regulate, you are going to be in a more regulated state more often than not, because if you're just reacting, then that you're training your nervous system to always be reacting,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah. There's also a little bit of an addiction to cortisol. So there's
Oh,
that thing too, where when we're constantly dysregulated, constantly being flooded with cortisol, our system becomes accustomed to high cortisol levels. So
interesting.
a little bit of an addiction to cortisol. So we have to
Did
also
not know this.
realize, yeah. So we have to realize that, are we crisis seeking? Do we,
Mm.
we need to be comfortable in peace. A lot of us who have trauma aren't comfortable in peace. We're hyper vigilant. We don't feel safe. So, and you're now wanting me to regulate and feel safe. That's scary, right? And so it's this gradual, am I addicted to cortisol? Am I afraid to be safe?
Hmm.
And then when we finally do get to feel that regulated nervous system, how to then find this to be baseline. But
Yep.
a lot of us, our baseline is crisis,
Dysregulation. Yep.
cortisol. But oh, I'll go meditate. I'll feel good for a minute. And then they jump right into a business call right after meditation because, oh, I need some juice, right?
Mm.
I need that cortisol. I need the stress. So, yeah,
Interesting.
we
Yeah,
got to,
that chemical reaction that your body
yeah,
has to cortisol is what
yeah.
you're saying. Yeah. And I will normalize too, and for those of you who are listening, and I actually had a conversation with somebody who's going to be on the podcast in a little bit, that dysregulation to a like, person, as you said, like that, I guess chaos is their normal. Chaos and dysregulation can feel normal to people that is their normal. Like as
Mm,
you said, feeling
yeah.
safe
That's their
doesn't
baseline.
feel unsafe. Exactly. Like that's their
Yeah.
baseline. So for people, and especially I think in a lot of times like relationships, people that are in like, toxic relationships where there's toxic behaviors in relationships, people are like, oh, like how did you stay in that for so long? And it's like, well, that's all your body knew. That's what your body
Yeah.
felt as familiar.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And it takes time for you to get out of it and for you, as you said, to kind of like see from a different perspective of like, oh no, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it could be like if you are regulated.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
sometimes scarier to leave the bad situation to the toward the good.
I know, which is
Unfamiliar
why
territory.
exactly, which is why I think it is so hard sometimes for us to get, like you just mentioned that like that kind of cortisol cycle. It's hard for us to get
Yeah.
out of that cycle because it is also too, as you mentioned, there's a chemical reaction going on too in our bodies that are kind of feeding that as well.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And then if you want to layer like ADHD on top of that,
Yeah.
I'm all messed up with dopamine shortages, norepinephrine shortages, and then you throw in some cortisol and you're like, ooh, that's kind of feels good. And yeah, so um another thing with ADHDers, we crisis seek because we get dopamine and we're short with
Ah,
dopamine. So that's the other kind of thing we have to look with ADHD and trauma and how they overlap. Are you crisis seeking because of your trauma response, or are you crisis seeking because maybe you need more dopamine in your environment? So we need to
interesting.
maybe amp that up. So brain I love brain chemicals. We could do a deep
Oh,
dive on brain
we could do a whole,
chemicals.
we could do, oh God, I would say I'm not an expert in brain chemicals, but I mean, I know like the top ones are like dopamine, oxytocin, cortisol. And yeah, it's amazing that sometimes I'm like we're running on this, like, this concoction, but then add in all the external factors, add in diagnoses, add in other people. It's like, it's amazing
Yeah.
we're even living and breathing and able to live lives.
Yeah. Oh, we're complex. We're just very
We are
complex.
very complex, but actually, as funny as complex as we are as humans, I always say if we bring it back to like simplicity and what you were saying, like just like mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health. If you take like, I
Yeah.
mean, as complex as all those four things are, if they're like the legs of your stool or your chair, if you can focus on each one of them and trying to make them stronger, that's when you're able to,
Yeah.
thrive.
Yeah. You have a good foundation and you can live a balanced life.
Exactly. That's also too balance. Another great thing
Yeah.
to I think that it's very hard, it's very easy for us to go, excuse me, for one extreme to the next. But if you have balance and peace and not being in a hypervigilant state where, you feel like you always have to be doing something, like it's okay to slow down. Like we're not built to always
Mm.
move. Like for me personally, like I've had to, and this is a learning lesson for me to even today, is that like rest does not need to be earned. Like I don't, this is, my body isn't a machine, you know?
For sure. And
You
and
know?
to highlight that for people that do a lot of physical fitness as their way to regulate their nervous system, I do yoga many times a day. I'm not always doing like hardcore Bikram. Like I'm not hitting it hard every time. Last night we did a 30-minute restorative where we mainly laid around and stretched. So you have to rest, relax, take care of your body. You don't have to do everything at 100%. In fact, sometimes,
Exactly.
nothing is great.
I
So
know. That was so yoga, so zen of you to say nothing is good. But yeah, no, but it's so true. I think that we
yeah,
live in such a society, and we talked about this the first time we spoke as well, is like we live in this like on society and this like we're always going and the more you achieve, and it's like there what we don't need to earn doing nothing. We don't need to earn enjoying our lives. We don't need to earn, that's like our
yeah,
bodies need rest. Our bodies need regulation. Our bodies need time to recharge. That's why we need sleep. You know what I mean? We couldn't
yes,
go, our brains couldn't go days without sleeping. Like, I mean, I know for me personally, when I'm having sleeping issues, I know that I'm dysregulated. Like that's one of my symptoms. I'm like, I know
yeah,
there's something going on that I'm dysregulated. I'm like, I need to get my sleep back in check.
yeah. Sleep is so important. You have to honor the hours for sleep, but a lot of people don't. They're so rushed. They get 4 hours, 5 hours, and I'm like, dude, I get 9 every
Yeah.
night. I go to bed the same time. I wake up at the same time. And do you want to crunch into my sleep? No, that because that's part of my practice. Like I
Yeah.
honor it just like I honor the yoga practice, how I eat,
Hmm.
how I get my dopamine, all of that. It becomes part of your practice.
That's amazing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that practice. I love we brought up practices because that was my thing. I don't know, that was I was on like a thing today. I was like, I just want to make everything like a practice and a process, like all the P's. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was like trying to, like think about like what really does, and it's the things you do daily or whatever, habitually. Well, not that we'll
Yeah.
take out daily. So things you do habitually to help yourself, just live your best, fullest life. And
You
there's
got
some,
it.
you have to just determine that what that means for you.
For sure.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Christina, this has been such a lovely conversation. I'll have to have you back so we could talk all about brain chemicals because I could talk about that stuff.
Yes.
I could talk about that stuff all day. But thank you so much for joining me
Oh, thank
and
you.
appreciate your time. And for everybody, as usual, the Feeling and Healing podcast will be on YouTube at Feeling and Healing, as well as Apple Podcast and Spotify.